Welcome, everyone. My name is Shachar Sadeh, and I'm the director of Adama New York Impact Hub. At Adama, we inspire and empower people and institutions to feel and act on the deep connection between peoplehood and planethood. We're catalyzing cultural and systemic change through Jewish environmental education, climate action, youth empowerment, and immersive retreats. Here in New York, we support Jewish institutions and help them transition to better and more sustainable management of their institutions, help them understand and develop climate action plans. So what does any of it has to do with food? What does food have to do with the environment and climate change? Usually when we think of our carbon footprint with regard to the car we drive or the energy we consume when using a boiler, but our personal, communal, and global food choices are responsible for roughly 30%, almost a third, of global greenhouse gas emissions. Now that we know that, what are the moral or value-based choices that we're making every day with the food we are serving? And what, if at all, is Jewish about it, about these choices? Our speakers today that I'll introduce in a minute will try to tackle these questions and refer to the different levels of engagement, going from the choices we make as individuals, as leaders in our institutions, as well as some of the local, national, and global aspects of those choices. And they'll also refer to some of the changes we're seeing these days that are being promoted by local policies and legislation. As I was preparing to give these opening remarks, I tried to think about what is the Jewish communal footprint with regards to food in New York. Unfortunately, I don't have a good or well-educated, very comprehensive answer to that, at least not yet. But I do have some relevant data to get us started, and that might help us think through how small changes we can make within our institutions could trickle down and up to impact the behavior of individuals on the one hand and the industry on another. So, for example, UJA, our partner, report that last year, 23.1 million pounds of food was distributed by local nonprofit partners it supports. This food was distributed to 2.6 million New Yorkers, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, that visited those partners' food pantries. UJ also reports that 11% of Jewish adults in New York suffer from food insecurity. And this is a similar percentage to the state-level food insecurity assessment. So one way of the Jewish community is dealing with food is supporting people in food pantries. And I talked to people at Met Council, which operates the largest kosher food pantry network in the country and serving over 200,000 people each month. And I learned that 40% of the food that they distribute comes from federal agencies. And that brings a different complication with it, such as how many items in that federal list of products are kosher before even thinking about its environmental impact. And they are very limited by the choice they can make there. But contrary to other agencies, Met Council pantries have some discretion to their food offering because of kashrut. So it feels quite limited in their ability to change and take steps, but it is there. But actually, what I also learned is that outside policies coming from New York City and state are changing things. So the city and the mayor's office, various food programs, for example, Get Food New York City, are advanced and try to focus on serving locally grown produce and lower their environmental impact. The same is true on the state level. As an example, Met Council actually received $2 million grant from the state to support local farmers. It's something that has started during the pandemic to purchase their produce in order to add plant-based offering to their menus. So these are some of the things that are changing. Another way, which we'll I think will be more the focus of our conversation today, that the Jewish community is impacting the food market in New York is by serving food within its institutions for congregants, students in day schools and yeshivas, people in nursing homes, as well as members and visitors of the different community centers. So we'll explore why some changes are needed and what can be implemented right away that makes sense from an ethic, environmental, health, and financial standpoint. And as the speakers will reiterate, it is not all or nothing. This is an incremental change that institutions are encouraged to adopt. However, understanding the power that our collective behavior change can have is crucial. And we at Adama believe that the Jewish community shouldn't just follow, but should lead the way, starting with its own institutions and eventually looking to the individual choices of its community members. Educating yourself and leading by example is why you're all here today. So our first speaker is Liana Levin-Reisner. She is building a multicultural movement for health as the president and network director of Plant Powered Metro New York, an organization she co-founded in 2019. And her effort empower local community to build health resilience through whole food plant-based nutrition. In 2022, Hunter College New York City Food Policy Center honored Liana as 40 under 40 rising star in food policy. Our second speaker will be Becky O'Brien, Adama's Director of Food and Climate. And Becky has been with Adama for more than 13 years and is passionate about helping Jewish people and organizations understand the impact of their food choices and supporting change. She's co-author of the Green Kiddush Guide and the We Are the Weather Discussing Guide for Jewish Community. So we'll start with Liana. Please ask your questions in the chat and we'll get to the Q&A after the two presentations. And as we go, I'll throw in the chat different links that the speakers will be referring to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shachar. It's such a pleasure to be here and great to see all of you this morning. I just want to preface this by saying how grateful I am that this conversation is happening in the Jewish community. My work has taken me beyond to work with communities of all backgrounds and stripes, but I always come back to center with my own community here. So what I want to talk about is the alignment of our values through plant-powered meals, both on the climate side and through health. And just by background, Plant Powered Metro New York, my organization, we are mostly focused on the health narrative of eating a plant-based diet because of its amazing healing potential. And we'll talk a little bit about that this morning. And our goal is to empower people to find better health and to overcome chronic disease using food as medicine. So I want to ground this in, for me, what is like the spiritual elements of my work. And that's really the miracle of eating plants as being so transformative for many levels of impact, both individual health and public health writ large, and for ecosystem health and planetary health on the much higher levels. And I think it's this miraculous thing that if you do one thing each day that can influence many levels on the positive, it's hard to find many more things other than food that do all of these things at once. And this alignment is just a reason that I have a lot of awe for the work that I have, that I do today, and for food in general. But where we need to start is really a look at the landscape. I want to ground us in health and then move to climate. In the landscape of the American diet, this is what the breakdown in our calories looks like across the country, where more than half of our calories are coming from processed foods, a third of our calories are coming from animal foods, and that leaves this small slice of 11% for plant foods, which unfortunately continue to still be processed. About half of the foods that are included here include potato chips and the apples and apple pies and the fruit and fruit bars, which we could really call much more processed than whole food. So on the whole, we are eating a very processed and animal-based diet. And we know, as we'll uncover as we go, that eating plants is really the key for health and for planetary sustainability. So when we look at how we compare dietary patterns, the standard American diet with its Western dietary pattern, breaking it down by macronutrient, just to sort of go into some of the weeds on nutrition. Carbohydrates, fat, and protein are the core building blocks of our food. And we find, unfortunately, that most of the carbohydrates we eat in the Western diet are refined. Most of the fat that we eat is saturated, coming from animal foods and from processed foods that have margarines or butters in them, for example. And then protein mostly coming from animal sources as well. But the evidence base is really heavily swinging toward the opposite path. A healthy dietary pattern across the globe is noted to be mostly composed of unrefined carbohydrates, and those are our whole grains, legumes, vegetables, fruits. All of those foods are high in carbohydrate, and they're all unrefined. Unsaturated fats, like those we find in nuts and seeds and in avocados, and healthy dietary patterns generally get most of their protein from plant sources, which are predominant in legumes and beans, but also in whole grains and even in vegetables. So I think it's important to have this sort of grounding before we move forward. So if you think then about what kind of impact the standard American diet has on our health, these are the leading causes of death in the US. They are probably not a surprise to any of you. You've likely known that heart disease and cancer are our top two killers. COVID-19 now is included on this list. But if we unpack COVID, we understand that it really is a factor of our collective lack of immune resilience in our bodies, something that can be helped with food, and also many of the comorbidities such as obesity and chronic kidney disease and respiratory illnesses and heart disease. All of these things are lifestyle-mediated issues. So if you look at the list, really everything but unintentional injuries are related to how we live our lives. And it's been estimated that about 80% of the chronic disease burden in the US and in other Western nations is related to diet and lifestyle. So these are things that we can do more to control. And it's not just to prevent those diseases through food, but also we can reverse diseases. And I like to share the story of cardiovascular disease most directly because we have such wonderful evidence that's been emerging. Not only through studies that show that when you eat a healthy and lower fat plant-based diet, that you're able to lower your cholesterol, that you're able to lower your blood pressure, but we're also able to restore blood flow to arteries and to the muscles of the heart that may have impairment as a result of what we eat. So these are examples from an amazing 5-year study that was done by Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn at the Cleveland Clinic, where the myocardium on the left had blood restored after just 3 weeks of eating a low-fat plant-based diet. And on the right, the widowmaker artery here, quite blocked through plaques in the artery, and blood flow was restored within 32 months of making dietary change, and without a stent, without other further procedures. And these are the kinds of results that I think most people, first of all, don't know about, but are wholly possible using food as medicine. And heart disease is just one of those things. There are many other impacts. What we find then, if we look even deeper at the literature on health, really flowing out of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, which is a professional network of clinicians and healthcare professionals across the country who are promoting lifestyle as our first line of intervention for health issues, we find 3 important elements of a healthy diet. 1, to eat primarily plant foods. 2, to eat them mostly in their whole food state, as unprocessed as we can make them. And then, of course, this other aspect of dietary fat, which is a difficult one to unpack, but for the most part, remembering to keep saturated fat low. And these are really the keys that unlock health for so many people. When we talk about what a healthy plant-based diet includes, these are sort of the big elements of the plant-powered plate: fruits and vegetables, legumes, whole grains, water as a drink of choice, some nuts and seeds. We talk about some minimal supplements as needed, especially B12 and vitamin D3, and then sources of omega-3 fatty acids, especially hemp and chia and flax seeds and walnuts as our primary sources. So these really are the package that go into health promoting foods. For me, as I made changes toward a plant-based diet, I was able to reverse the symptoms of endometriosis, which I had lived with for more than 15 years. And I met so many people who would overcome colitis, Crohn's, hypertension, heart disease, who had come back after serious stroke, who had lost many pounds after being obese or overweight and trying to deal with it through various forms of dieting. This is not a diet, it is a lifestyle. It's something that can promote health at all levels, and it's something that has really inspired me, and we'll hear more about this as we talk about the city as well. Now, I want to transition into talking about the climate, because, of course, as we're making changes to how we eat, we can also positively impact the climate. I could talk about processed foods and how, of course, when you serve a potato, it goes through much less transportation and energy usage than when it goes to a factory to be processed into chips or other food products and then put in bags to sit on a shelf stable before it finally gets to your table. That's one way that we can talk about the environmental impact of food. But when we really want to figure out what the big elephant in the room is, it is animal agriculture. And that's where we're going to focus our attention. I think the place to start is, of course, how many animals across the globe are being used, raised, and slaughtered for food every day. And these data come from our World in Data, which is a really excellent source of these sort of metrics that help us put things into context on a very wide scale. And you'll see 900,000 cows are killed each day around the world for food, 3.8 million pigs, 202 million chickens, and hundreds of millions of fish. And with fish, it's very interesting because whenever we fish, we're not just fishing, we're also trawling up quite a bit of other wildlife that are in the oceans. And so there are many discards, things that we're not intending to pull up with the fish, that also get thrown back into the ocean and are part of the overall picture of the climate impact of our food system. So when we have animals at this scale, being slaughtered on land or in the sea, let's talk about land first. We end up using quite a bit of land for these many billions of animals that we slaughter each year. So we need to do the math. We have more than 4 billion acres on Earth, which are estimated to be arable land. Arable land is the land that food can grow on, where it's suitable to have crops. But we have more than 8 billion people on Earth. So if you divide a simple division, you get about a half an acre of land, of arable land per person. The unfortunate news is when we are eating a Western diet, the estimated land use for each person is 3¼ acres of land, which, as you can see, is far beyond what it should be if we're trying to shoot for no more than half an acre. But if we shift that to a plant-based dietary pattern, then we can get in the zone where each person who's eating a plant-based diet is using 0.17 to 0.5 acres of land. And ultimately, as we make these shifts, whether it's wholesale or just the gradual change, we're going to free up land to feed more people on Earth, which is going to solve global hunger issues, and it's also going to solve our environmental health issues. And this data also comes from our worldindata.org. Land use is one piece of it. The question is, well, for raising all these animals, it's not just the land that we're using directly to house them or to have them in pasture if we have them in pasture, which is not always a given. It's also the water and the land that we're using to grow crops. So really the major way that we use water in the US is going into animal agriculture, where it's estimated that 50% of water is used for that. And that's because we're not just watering the animals, we're watering all the crops that we're growing to feed them, whether it's soy or wheat or corn in particular, all of the grains that are then fed to animals. And that means that we're depleting groundwater. Groundwater depletion is one of the primary issues that it's actually been reported on very recently in the New York Times. And it's not something that will we'll be able to recover quickly. But we know that because of all of the water involved in raising animals, that it takes about 2,400 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of meat compared to 25 gallons of water producing 1 pound of wheat. And there are many other impacts. Becky will talk more about greenhouse gas emissions as an example. But the core here is that when we eat plants, there is a potential for healing on so many levels. We are able to heal ourselves on a human health level. We're able to restore health to our ecosystems and our planet. We're able to address global poverty issues as it relates to the food supply, redirecting essential calories from animals directly to people. And then for those who are tapped into the ethics of the animal issues, all of these things together show us how transformative it is when we really center what we eat on a very different kind of dietary pattern. So going back to what Shachar was saying, Jewish communal food choices absolutely matter. And each of you, I'm sure, sits on many thousands of meals, if not hundreds of thousands of meals each day, serving kids, serving older adults, serving young people at Hillel's, doing emergency relief. So we have an obligation, I think. I hope we feel that way. We do have an obligation to use our purchasing power for good. So I'm going to spend the next little bit of my talk before turning it over to Becky, going into New York City as a model, as an entity that's making intentional choices that I think we as a Jewish community can emulate. And that's because the purchasing power of New York City is quite huge, as you likely have guessed. New York City Mayor Eric Adams is one of those individuals. Whether you appreciate his politics or not is not on the table here, but really, everybody should know that his health dramatically improved after a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. Using whole food plant-based nutrition, he put all of his symptoms into remission, including a dramatically elevated hemoglobin A1C. He had blindness in one eye. He had neuropathy, losing the ability to feel in his fingers and his toes. And all of his symptoms went away using food as medicine. So he has made it part of his legacy as mayor to implement many changes to our food system through food policy efforts. So one of the things that Mayor Adams and his colleagues have done within the hospital system is they've begun a number of clinics using plant-based nutrition and lifestyle medicine to offer counseling to patients with advanced chronic disease so that they too can find relief using food and not only medicine and procedures, which are costly to the city. So to complement what they're doing in the clinic, they've also created the default plant-based meal options in hospitals. This has not really been covered very well in local media. Which is a bit surprising. But the uptake within the hospital system for anybody who comes in, if you have an acute issue or a chronic need and you're staying in the inpatient parts of the hospitals, you will be offered a plant-based meal first, and you have to actively decline it in order to get something else. The uptake on this has been really amazing. I think about more than 50% of people are choosing to keep the plant-based option, and there's a very high, like 90 to 95% satisfaction level for people who are choosing those foods. And they've been talking about this throughout the country in many different conferences about the really unlikely success of this approach to plant-based default meals. They've also been doing something similar within schools. As you may have heard early on in Mayor Adams' administration, they made the transition to doing plant-powered Fridays, sort of like a corollary to Meatless Mondays. Meatless Mondays, of course, is a time when there may not be meat, but there's plenty of mozzarella sticks and pizza and things that center dairy quite a bit, but it doesn't mean that there are healthier plant foods on kids' plates. So they really wanted to refocus the conversation on plants as from a positive perspective and not what was missing in kids' diets. So plant-powered meals, in order for it to be successful, they drew in a bunch of chefs to be part of a chef's council working with the nonprofit provider Wellness in the Schools. And they tested a bunch of recipes with kids and then rolled out those recipes throughout the city. And as some of you who may be public school parents will know, this is an imperfect rollout by any measure, because we have a lot of issues on a structural level we need to get to, from, cafeteria enhancements to chef training. And then, of course, for kids and their willingness to eat different kinds of foods than they have ever been served before in their cafeterias. But it's an important step, regardless of whether people are taking it up right now. It is an important public policy step because of the climate and health implications. Now, at the same time, and I know some of you are also here from our older adult centers and agencies, plant-based meals were also mandated to be provided once per week in our older adult centers, and also, I believe, through the delivery services that are provided to older adults who are homebound. And similar issues are coming up there in terms of the acceptability of these meals for older adults and the capacity of our centers and our food service providers to make meals that are tasteful and that feel satisfying to people. But the imperative is there, and there's been a lot of great effort within the Department for the Aging to make it work for many centers, and some have been wildly successful. New York City's Mayor's Office of Food Policy is another zone where there's been a lot of activity going on. They are often reporting on the things going on in different aspects of departmental food efforts. And one of the things they've done is created this dashboard which shows the greenhouse gas emissions, specifically carbon dioxide emissions of the different foods served by the city across all agencies, but you can also dig in and look at agency by agency. So they're able to track that the primary contributor to greenhouse gas emissions from New York City food procurement is from dairy, probably because it's required through federal guidelines to be provided in schools, but also meat is not far behind. One of the efforts that the Mayor's Office of Food Policy is promoting, which I want to bring to your attention if anybody would be interested in following in the footsteps of some other companies that have stepped forward, the Plant-Powered Carbon Challenge is an effort for the city to say, look, we're changing our procurement approaches because we know that we're going to reduce emissions from the food that we're providing. We want other large companies and organizations with food service to make similar commitments so that we collectively can make this change. So if you would like to join this, there's more information that Shachar is providing in the chat box so you can learn about it. And then some of you may have relationships with some of the larger food vendors like Aramark or Sodexo. Each of them has already made significant commitments to plant-based menus. I think mostly driven by the fact that young people in colleges are really asking for this. They know that food is part of the equation for climate health, and so there's been a lot of effort to move in this direction. And then I'm just going to wrap up my segment by focusing on cost. There's some great data that's come out of the Humane Society of the United States work called Forward Food. Forward Food is working with people like Aramark and Sodexo to make changes to food service and make them more plant forward. And so what you'll find is that this data is showing, look, you can take tuna salad, make it with chickpeas. It's actually really delicious. And you save 42 cents for every 3-ounce serving that you have. And same for chili. You can choose beans over beef and save 71 cents for every 4 ounces. It might even be higher if you have to source kosher meat, which might be more expensive. I don't think that this takes that into account. If you're making wraps with deli chicken and you change them to black beans, you could save 85 cents per wrap. If you're making eggplant rollatini with ricotta, you could save 58 cents by changing to red pepper hummus stuffing. And burritos, beans and sweet potatoes instead of beef and rice, saving 40 cents. So these are just examples of some of the changes. Now you might end up shifting your costs toward more fresh romaine lettuce or other kinds of vegetables that would be part of a salad bar. But that's okay. I think if we can save in certain ways in order to be able to spend more wisely in other spaces, that's really important for the health quotients and the climate impact of our meals. And we also have some great resources that are available of these recipes that are at quantity so that folks who are producing meals for many people at a time don't have to do the math too hard. But Forward Food and a number of other organizations have produced these recipe PDFs and other kinds of resources that you can access, which have plant-based options for you to choose from. I will make the whole food caveat, though, coming from the health perspective, which is that even if something is billed as a plant-based or vegan option, it may be great for the planet. But to really get to the health impact, we need to have whole foods. So opting for the Beyond Burger is going to be more expensive, and it's going to be higher in sodium and higher in other kinds of additives that are not useful for our health. But if we can make some in-house bean burgers or opt for sweet potatoes instead of something else, we really want to try to find ways to serve up whole foods so that we can hit all of the great impacts that I was speaking about before. So as it turns out, implementation challenges are high, but they are not insurmountable. For us in the Jewish community, one of those is going to be sourcing kosher certified food service providers. And, I think it's already starting in terms of working with, a company like Aramark, which services certain kosher organizations. But it can be done. And I think we have a lot more work to do, though, to educate our kosher caterers. Also in-house chef training. So some of you may have those kitchens where you have a kitchen manager or a culinary manager or a chef, or your lay people who might be preparing kiddush for a synagogue. All of those things require people to know what we're talking about here and to be able to go deeper in how they can prepare meals for health and climate impact. There's also, as I mentioned before, a really strong draw for the convenience of processed vegan options. It may seem a lot easier to make, a pizza with some kind of oil-based vegan cheese on top of it compared to something that has a cashew ricotta on top. But these are things that are also surmountable, and I think we just have to set our minds to offering up healthy food in addition to climate-friendly food. And lastly, as I mentioned before, community acceptability is the big thing here. And one of the ways we can get there, I believe, is through honest and straightforward education so that our people understand how important it is to go with us into this new food future. This is the only way forward for our health. It's the only way forward for the environment. And part of what oops, my slide is not loading. But through Plant Powered Metro New York, we offer quite a bit of educational partnerships for people who are interested in bringing this to their community through presentations, through cooking classes, through market tours, through film screenings and talkbacks, and also through chef training. We have a new initiative called Plant Powered Plates, where we are focusing first on restaurants to try to make sure that we have healthy plant-based options available in our restaurants, but we also want to have a positive impact on food service. So I'd be happy to talk about that with anybody who's interested. But I'm going to stop here and yield the floor to Becky and allow her to take it from here.
Thank you so much, Liana. This was wonderful. Becky, you can take it from here.
Absolutely. Hello. It is good to see at least your names. If you come off screen, I get to see your face, but that's okay if you're not. Liana, thank you so much. Very glad to be here with all of you. And really, I'm just very grateful for you showing up and having interest in this. It's part of what makes me feel like my day is meaningful today. So really, a lot of gratitude for that. So I'm going to just dive right in with some questions for you to consider for yourself. This is a poll. It's a poll you're going to just take in your own head, although I encourage you to write down on a piece of paper your answer. And I would like you to consider how much you personally are motivated, how much you want to be moving toward climate friendlier, healthier food at your organization. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being like there's nothing you want more in the world, you want this very badly, you think about it all the time, and 1, I have no desire for this at all. I don't think we have any ones, or you wouldn't even be with us today. But just think about where that is for yourself. If you're inclined to share in the chat, that's great. But really, this is just a marker for your own self. And then on a scale of 1 to 10, how equipped do you feel to take action to change your menu and your organization? With 10 being, I feel fully equipped, action's already happening, or we're about to do it, and we've got lots of ideas, know what to do. 1 being, I have no idea where to start. So just note those for yourself, and I'll just name explicitly that for us, our goal is to move you a bit on both of these numbers by the end of our time together today. And so my fingers crossed that we'll be able to make that happen. And so, but we're going to go ahead and dive in on. I am a colleague of Shachar's at Adama, and the question may be, why do we focus so much on food choices? In fact, so much so that we have a director of food and climate, someone dedicated to really looking at these issues and helping the organizations we work with on them. And there's 5 primary reasons. One is that we are an organization that is deeply concerned about climate change, and it turns out that reducing food waste and plant-rich diets are near the very top of the actions needed to reverse climate change. These are high impact areas where we can be making a difference. And as an organization with limited resources, we want to be focusing on where we can really make a big difference. Also, it's the case that, as the author Jonathan Safran Foer says, changing how we eat will not be enough on its own to save the planet, but we cannot save the planet without changing how we eat. The impact of our food choices is so high that if we were to do everything else but not address our food choices, it would not do what we need to do to keep our temperature down. And so we are working on a mandatory critical ingredient. And so that feels powerful to us. Of course, food is central to Jewish life and tradition. We've been thinking about, as a community, as a culture, about what food is fit to eat, what food is kosher for generations. It comes very naturally to us to think about our food choices deeply and meaningfully with intention. And so to be in a Jewish space doing this work feels like a natural fit. And something that Liana already covered really nicely is you really know you've stumbled on a good solution when it addresses so many issues. It is indeed the case that it is better for the climate to have more plant-rich diets, but it addresses many other environmental issues: hunger, animal welfare, personal health, and I don't even need to say anything more about health. You saw very deeply how much this helps that. And so this is, again, limited resources. We can work on this one issue and help all these, work on this one solution, help all these issues. That's great. And then lastly, just strategically, experimenting with plant-rich diets is something that you can do immediately. It doesn't require any special knowledge or training. It's not a huge black or white major overhaul. You can be doing it incrementally. And as Liana also shared, it's cost neutral or can even save you money. These are the reasons why we prioritize when working with organizations looking at the food that they serve. So I once saw this slide and I could never unsee it. So I'm going to leave it up here for a little while because I want, if you leave and nothing else sticks in your head, that you see this and you can't unsee this. So greenhouse gas emissions come from a variety of sources. When most of us think about emissions, we probably think about the fossil fuel that's burned to power our homes, offices, and automobiles. And while these are all important and huge emission sources, there is another significant and particularly intimate source, which is our food. All foods have emissions associated with their production. Emissions come from nearly every step of the food production process: growing and raising the food, harvesting, storing, packaging, transportation, selling, and more. However, there's a wide range of impact among the foods we consume, and industrial meat and dairy have a lot more impact than others. Beef has 10 times the emissions of poultry, and poultry has 10 times that of peas. Dairy items have a much lower climate impact than beef, but cheese is still 55 times more impactful than nuts. In general, plants have a much lower impact than animals. This primarily has to do with the amount of energy required to produce the equivalent amount of meats and plants. It is also related to deforestation for cattle grazing and to the emissions of ruminants while they are alive. And that's specifically methane and nitrous oxide. Those two have significantly higher global warming potential, which means the ability to trap heat, than carbon dioxide does. And methane and nitrous oxide are the second and third most prevalent greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Animal agriculture is the leading source of human-created methane emissions. As they digest food, cattle, goats, and sheep produce a significant amount of methane, which is mostly belched, but also exhaled, farted, and passed in the waste of the animal. And livestock is the leading source of nitrous oxide, and it's emitted through urine, manure, and the fertilizers used for growing their feed crops. And livestock for meat and dairy account for at least 14.5% of the world's emissions each year. That's roughly the same amount as emissions from all the cars, trucks, airplanes, and ships combined in the world today. So that's the global collective impact of our food system. Thank goodness none of us are responsible for all of that impact, but we are responsible for thinking about how to address our part. You are here to think about your organization's emissions and how to reduce them. You can start by considering the footprint of the food you currently serve. And there's a resource called the Green Meter Eater, which we'll share a little bit more about where you can get connected to that. But to understand, it's absolutely not necessary to measure the emissions of your entire menu as part of doing the work that you do, but it can be eye-opening. For example, looking at this 1 5-ounce serving of beef has the same impact as driving 10.5 miles and uses 570 gallons of water. So imagine if you're doing an event, perhaps you're a Hillel doing a back-to-school barbecue, or you're a synagogue hosting a newcomer's picnic, and you're serving 100 5-ounce burgers. That's like driving 1,050 miles. You could use a delicious recipe that replaces half the beef with beans or mushrooms and slash that impact nearly in half. There are so many delicious options that maintain variety and choice while they significantly reduce your impact. And you can run your own comparisons between the impact of animal proteins and the impact of plant-based alternatives on this Green Meter Eater. My hope with sharing this example is that it conveys to you how significant the impact of your food choices are and how much power you genuinely have to reduce your impact. And so I'm going to go ahead and move us forward. So now that we understand what a big deal our food choices are, the really great news is that there are indeed many solutions available to reduce the climate impact of our food choices. But just a few things for you to keep in mind first. Incremental changes make a difference. It is not all or nothing. This is not about doing that complete menu overhaul at once. Please don't get overwhelmed or intimidated. I find that so regularly in my work. People think, oh, we can't do this whole thing. And then they think, so we'll do nothing. That's not what you have to do. Pick one thing. And you can start making changes immediately, literally with the very next meal you serve or the next order that you place with your food service company. These changes can be done in small steps. For example, you can just experiment with just one upcoming meal, just one ingredient that's maybe high rotation. You don't need any kind of special knowledge or training. Of course, there is so much that you could learn as you get going, but it's not required and certainly not necessary to get started. And as Liana covered, these changes are generally cost neutral and can even save you money. So now we're going to dive into some actual solutions. And really, there's just one straightforward climate solution here. There's really one. It's not that complicated. It is quite simply to decrease the amount of industrial meat and dairy you're serving and increase the amount of plant-based dishes. You want more plants, period. That's really the climate solution. That is the thing that you need to do. But how do we do that? And there are a number of tactics that you could try. And so I'm going to dive into some of those with you here. And I want to emphasize that all of these I'm going to share with you today are spelled out and supported by a bunch of tips, tools, and links that I'm going to mention here are in a resource guide that Adama created for members of the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition. Shahar is going to share the link for that in the chat at some point, and it will also be shared with you in a follow-up email. You are welcome to take notes, but I strongly recommend that you just use the resource guide that we're going to send your way. Normally, we restrict access to this guide to members of the coalition, but because you are located in one of Adama's impact hubs and because you are joining us today, we are going to share it with you. And please know that this is just one example of the benefits available to those in the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition, which if you're not already a member, I encourage you to join. So the first technique I want to share with you is to increase plant-based options by making them the default. Liana already shared an example of that that's happening in the New York area. And this is something that's super simple and it's free. And it's a great technique that's super effective at reducing meat, dairy, and eggs. and it doesn't limit choice. And that means it doesn't generate complaints, which is a huge thing. When you're feeding people, you want them to be happy about their food. And the research is showing that it's making a huge difference. So one example of how this can look is at buffets. You simply place the meat offerings at the end of the buffet. The research shows that this step alone significantly cuts the amount of meat that's taken. And then after you do that a few times, you're able to adjust down how much you order and put out to begin with. But meanwhile, it's there and the choice is still available. Another example is for events or programs where people pre-select their meal. Perhaps it's a fancy fundraiser or a retreat or a conference that people are registering for. You make the plant-based option the default and then allow people to opt in for the meat option. There's an organization called Greener by Default, which is a terrific resource if you want to explore this more, and they're linked to in our resource guide. So whether hiring a chef for your in-house food service or a caterer for one-off events, select ones who are creative and talented at making delicious, varied vegetarian and fully plant-based or vegan meals. And support your current staff to develop those skills if they don't already have them. Partially and fully plant-based menus can be delicious in the right hands, just as meat and dairy dishes can be not so delicious in the wrong hands. I'll add that it may be the case that chefs with experience with vegetarian and plant-based meals aren't always available. That may be even especially true if you're limited to kosher options. But remember that you are an important customer and hence you are powerful. By making your climate-friendly preferences known, you're sending a signal that there is demand. The more the vendors realize this is a top priority for their clientele, the more they're going to expand their skills and offer this to everyone. So speak up and advocate so that eventually, if you can't make the changes now, you will be able to because you've been asking for them. Quickly just saying that you can pick out that one day a week, have those meatless Mondays or those plant-forward Fridays. And there's, again, resources in the resource guide that are specifically designed around supporting programs like this. You can experiment with swapping out a single animal product with a plant-based alternative. You can try beef or poultry substitutes or explore replacements for dairy products like milk, creamer, mayonnaise, butter, even ice cream. And I encourage you to have fun doing this. You can do a tasting party with a cohort group. We once actually did that at our own organization. At our staff retreat, we had an ice cream party that was all plant-based ice creams and plant-based toppings, and it was a lot of fun. And you can just get as many substitutes as the item you're looking to replace and let people taste them and vote for them. And there's an organization called Shemaim, Jewish Animal Advocacy, and they operate a synagogue vegan challenge. So for any synagogues who are here today, this is a great opportunity to get support, including funding, to do vegan programming for a year. You can add variety in both taste and nutritional profile by replacing half of the meat or dairy with a plant-based alternative. So think about some of your community's favorite high rotation meat and dairy based meals and recipes and learn how to cut the meat or dairy in half through reduction and substitution. As you saw from the example shared earlier with the green meat eater, this can make a big difference. There was a Hillel in California that hosted their back to school barbecue featuring burgers that were half beef and half mushroom. Nobody had a clue and everyone raved about how tasty it was. Lastly, I just want to say it's not the cow, it's the how. I've been emphasizing that having less meat and dairy is the top action to take to reduce your menu's greenhouse gas emissions. And you may have noticed me using the term industrial meat and dairy. And this is on purpose. I would be remiss if I did not mention that having better meat and dairy can also be part of your plan. Industrial meat and dairy from factory farms are terrible for the climate, not to mention being sources of water and air pollution, breeding grounds for diseases, and horrible for animals. And to be clear, 99% of meat in the United States comes from factory farms, and that includes kosher meat. Meanwhile, regenerative agriculture is a system of farming practices that is much, much better for the environment. And while emissions cannot be completely eliminated from animal agriculture, they can be reduced through these regenerative practices. So you could swap out one or more industrial meat or dairy products with one that was created through regenerative agriculture. And again, the resource guide that we'll email you after this program has lots to say about all of these solutions. And so please open that up when you get it. I'll just briefly also do a shout out, as Liana did, to the Forward Food Pledge. It's a terrific program, which is a free free program of the Humane Society of the United States. And I especially recommend it for organizations who have in-house food service operations like day schools, summer camps, senior living facilities. You will sign a pledge committing to increase your plant-based entrees by 10%. And by signing up to do that, you gain free access to a team of expert chefs, registered dietitians, and food service specialists who offer a wide range of support to help you find menu changes that are impactful and the right fit for your organization. So by reducing the amount of industrial meat and dairy you serve, you're directly reducing the emissions of your organization. You can also expand your impact beyond your own emissions reductions. One thing you could do is create a food policy for your organization. These often exist already and address your kashrut standards, but you could go beyond that to address the other ways that Jewish values inform food choices and consider climate and environmental impacts, treatment of animals and workers, sustainability of packaging, how healthy the food actually is. And this food policy could be actually binding rules or just aspirational guidelines. I would just encourage you to keep in mind that changes around the food you serve do not have to wait for a policy to be in place. So creating a policy is an action that can happen concurrently with actually implementing the ideas that I've already shared. Changes happen outside the kitchen too. While working with your kitchen staff and other decision makers to change your menu is important, remember that your diners also need to be invested. The Ford Food Program can help with this. We also have great resources for this in the resource guide that will help you educate the people that you're feeding. And you can leverage your organization's internal work to achieve broader community change by actively educating and influencing your community around the benefits of eating plant-based foods. You can place prominent signage, put blurbs in your newsletter, post updates, do educational programs, or I would say don't. Consider what your community is like. It's really wonderful to be high profile and educational around changing your food choices, but remember that not every community is maybe up for this and ready for this, and some may be resistant if they're told in advance that it's happening. But if they just eat the food and it's good and nobody's making a big deal out of it, maybe you don't shout it from the rooftops. You just make the changes quietly. The climate's going to benefit either way. Or maybe you make the changes, then kind of tell people about it afterwards. So that's for you to figure out what's right for your community there. And additionally, I'm just going to go through this very quickly because Liana already addressed it. So many other environmental issues that benefit from going to a climate-friendly menu, the cost savings, also kashrut friendly. Note plant-based foods are parve. Getting more of them on your menu expands variety at both meat and dairy meals. They're more inclusive, they're healthier, and they're aligned with so many Jewish values. And with a minute left, I just want to say that to remember that the choices we make around the food we serve has significant consequences for our climate. There are many doable solutions available to you that you can start taking action on right now. Please don't fall into that trap or all of nothing. Do not make perfect the enemy of the good. And maybe I'm just talking to myself and I'm the one who does that, but I hear it from others too. Just get started with one thing. The Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition has resources that can really help you. If you're not a member already, consider joining. And lastly, listen, we bless our food. Let's choose to serve food that is worthy of blessing and that has been grown and raised in a way that's good for the earth, animals, and for people. And to close out with a favorite of mine, Jonathan Safran Foer, everyone will eat a meal relatively soon and can immediately participate in the reversal of climate change, and it can be delicious. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky. That was wonderful. We have about 15 minutes for a Q&A, so please add your questions to the chat. We would love to see your faces, and you can also unmute yourself and ask a question. So please go ahead.
And I did just want to ask again, if you pause for that moment and go back to those first questions on that scale of 10, 1 to 10, how much do you want to move your organization towards a climate friendlier menu, and see if that number's changed for you. and how equipped do you feel to take action, and see if that number's changed for you. And if it hasn't changed very far, then ask the question that's blocking you now so that we can move you closer to that 10 that we'd love to see you at. Go ahead. I see Keela. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name right.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the presentation. I work at Hadar in New York, and we offer at all our programs and our yeshiva, we order in from a caterer. So we don't really have a functional kitchen space ourselves. It's all vegan, technically, like it's all parve, but it's mostly like what was being mentioned at the top, more like a Beyond Meat and not, like a very processed plant-based menu. There's salads, but like the little mandarins that we're getting are clearly like from the can, and the meat it's so drenched in I don't know what. So I'm wondering, for an organization that's already doing plant-based options, but it's highly processed, what you suggest the next step is in terms of working with the caterer to, explore even more like a whole food, menu.
I'll just make a brief comment, and then I think Liana is going to have some terrific thoughts, which is that to remember that it's incremental, and that in a lot of communities, making bridges away from meat to meat analogs that are in some cases highly processed is a step in a journey. And as long as that's not your ending spot, that it's totally appropriate to explore different things. And so I love that you're already doing that and thinking, and how do we move forward? So to just say there's really no shame in anything anyone is serving. There is nothing about being perfect or the best here. Just learning enough to say, oh, okay, where can we change and do a little bit better? So I just wanted to give a little commentary there, but Liana, I imagine you have a lot to share.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Becky. And thank you. Great question, Kayla. I would say this is just an opportunity for conversation with the caterer. And, something that you could do is offer up some example recipes of things that you'd like to have. I definitely did that with my daughter's bat mitzvah, just shopping around for different caterers. And depending on how they got back to me, I had a sense of whether they could really internalize it or not. So, it may be that you need to fire your caterer if you want to have something a little different, but you will likely learn a lot just by opening the conversation. And honestly, this is how we get people to change their approach in the first place. When I go to people and I say, I really don't want roasted vegetables drenched in oil. I would rather have them like air fried, essentially. Can you do that? Is the question first. And then if they want my business, the answer will be yes. And if they don't, then they'll walk away. So I think we have a lot of power as the consumer to introduce ideas and to give them some tools that will help them to consider ways that they might change so that we get what we want.
Thank you. Wonderful question. Turning to
I just wanted to add quickly that I'm sure Liana and both our resource guide, our organizations have lots of recipe resources. So if you're really looking at some really great substitutes and you're thinking like, okay, well, where do I find those things to share with my caterer? Forward Food in particular is for high quantity places that are producing hundreds and hundreds of meal, like not just a recipe for 8 people or 4 people. So just wanted to flag that those are sources to fill in that if you're wondering where to get those.
I want to turn to Adele Yadid, and she can share something about her synagogue. Go ahead, Adele.
Sorry, just trying to unmute there. Hi, everybody. My name is Adele Yadid. I'm a registered dietitian, and I do plant-based cooking as well. And I was going to share a little bit. I was talking to Shahar recently about our synagogue downtown New York on Sullivan Street, and how we transitioned from outsourcing a lot of the food, the costliness of that, and the impact of that also environmentally, versus having an house kitchen and catering done on premises. And I think that was touched on briefly, you know, in the different talks today about how that is great in so many ways. So I don't have hard data. I was saying I was trying to get some data on like numbers to give people for an idea of what savings that is, because it's a huge financial savings. But I just was talking, you know, to her about that and how that is something that is very great if it can be done. So if there's any questions about that.
Yeah, and I'm sure the food is much more delicious done on premise and fresh rather than being bought and outsourced.
Yes, I'm gonna now, from watching this whole talk, which was so interesting, I think we need to do some more plant-based cooking in the synagogue in terms of even like Shabbats and things. So I think that it's good to always be reminded, you know, even sometimes you could know things, but you lose yourself somewhere along the way. So it's good to kind of to be reminded.
I have a question, Adele.
Sure.
Is it staff that's providing the cooking?
Yes. So it's someone
Okay.
who is working in the synagogue and running like administration, who actually is also able to do a lot of the food prep and cooking.
Because we have a member who is
Okay.
doing that. We have a member who is cooking for Saturday
Okay.
for Kiddush, and for quite a while now, it has been mostly plant-based.
That's amazing.
But there's very hard to remove the craving for lox and bagels. And I wonder if there's any alternative to these type of smoked foods, which I personally can't eat and I don't find very helpful.
I've seen smoked carrot done and parsnip as well. I mean, it's not gonna do the same as like a lox exactly, but I've seen some very interesting ways of using of smoking celery root, as well as like I said, carrot and different root vegetables, and using them. I once had something that blew my mind many years ago, which was celery root pastrami, and it was done so well. It was, I mean, texture wise, it's probably the only the main difference, but flavor wise, they really reached the place. So
Right, but it might still have that high sodium level.
so yeah, it's
Right.
probably very difficult to get the
Right.
fully healthful version that's going
Right.
to taste
So
similar with plants. Yeah.
it's like with the processed meat substitutes. You don't want to, it's good to change the basis of the food, but if you're still doing the high processing and high sodium, the health benefits aren't that good. But thank you for the information.
Yes, any further questions, remarks, anyone?
I'll just say that in our resource guide, we link to Jewish Initiative for Animals and Shemaim and Jewish Veg, which are all three Jewish organizations that work to encourage and support vegetarian and vegan/plant-based diets. And they have a lot of recipes for very classic Jewish dishes. So along the lines of what you're talking about, I would point to those in particular that may be of use. And I'll just mention there was a movement called Mushi for a while. It was meat only on Shabbats, holidays, and Yontifs or something like that. And the idea being that there's very little that's terrible if we're having it on occasion and as a celebration. And whether that's meat or smoked foods or things like that, when it's the thing taking up our whole plate at every meal, that's a big problem. And when it's maybe once a week or once a month, and that it can be celebratory, and we in fact actually enjoy it that much more. And so those are some other thoughts.
Aisha, I saw you muted yourself.
Yes, hi. I work at JASA, which is a large not-for-profit that serves older adults throughout New York City. And in my role, I provide administrative oversight of our 18 older adult centers. And we've worked closely for the last few years now with Leanna and her team at PPMNY. And so while I don't have a question, I do want to say that, Becky, it was very helpful to hear the suggestions you gave about making plant-based options the default. And we're similar, Kayla, that we have where all of our centers are catered, but we have a lot of special events. And that's an opportunity to work with an outside caterer that specializes in vegan and or more plant-based options. But I also really like the idea of having the plant-based options be first and any meat that we do offer at the end of the line. I really like that. So I wanted to thank you for that.
Yeah, well, it's just amazing that there are little tweaks like that that are very high impact. And so if you end up doing that, report back to us and let us know how it goes.
Absolutely.
I just want to say that's a great idea, but how do you make that work in New York? Because people will not respect going in one direction.
Oh.
Yeah, they'll skip the line and go get the meat.
I think that's a different webinar.
Okay. But it's true. It's true, but I think it's a great idea to especially to make the platters as attractive as possible with the plant-based, and then just have less attractive with the other. That's, I think, another good idea.
A lot of people come over to me at Kiddush and they say, wow, your plate is so colorful. And then they look at their own and then they're like, they're done. But it's just like, you know, at some point, if most of the foods are colorful, then it makes it easier to not be the lone wolf in all of this.
All right.
I want to thank Kobe for the what he put in the chat. Kobe, I think Adama will be following up with you, but there's an offer to be in touch for a donation to sample some plant-based cheese products. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also added a good friend of mine, Chef Pete, who has worked in the vegan food space for a long time, and he just moved back to New York. If anybody is looking for a caterer or a vegan chef specifically, I just put his LinkedIn in the chat. I come from a different world. I changed my diet for health reasons about 10 years ago, but I grew up in New York City, and I could live without a lot of things, but I couldn't live without pizza. So Please is a plant-based cheese that's made from fava bean and chickpeas. It does work. It is in that processed food spectrum, but it is so good that people actually can't tell the difference. And I have a lot of moments where people are like, wait, is this vegan? Are you sure? So we kind of look at ourselves as a stepping stone towards a healthier diet. And I definitely would love to partner with any community-based, and we can donate a case or two. We could do events together. If you're in New York, we'd love to help you and create just friendlier for the environment cheese products or recipes.
Wonderful. You'll be hearing from me. All right. I want to thank again the wonderful speakers and all of you today for joining us. It was definitely, I learned a lot, even though I wasn't preparing with everyone. I want to say that, again, we need to think about it as individuals with our direct impact, but also as a community, and understand that the choices that we are making also educate the people around us. And it's highly important to create those spaces. Now we understand so much better why we need to do that. I encourage everyone to join our climate coalition. I've added a link in the chat, and I'll be sending the link around with the rest of the other links that were shared in a follow-up email. And looking forward to seeing you all in our future webinars too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.